Hello everyone, this is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team to reduce the potential for fraud, compliance fines, and just overall bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. My head is starting to hurt as clients, subscribers, and others reach out to ask about the impact of the IRS draft form W-9. Now, more and more questions are arising, and I have 5 that you should really start thinking about. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 370. At least 5 questions to ask now in preparation for the publication of the IRS draft form W-9. Now, in case you didn't know, there is a draft version of the IRS W-9. Yes, the same one that had a publication or revision back in March of 2024. And we had enjoyed so many years of a same W-9 with no updates. That revision date was October 2018. And wow, that was nice. We went all the way until March 2024. Not that we didn't get some notice because that draft form originally for the March 2024 revision date, that draft version came out in July. I think it was July 26th of 2023. And so we had quite a while to wait, quite a few iterations of the draft versions. And so now, though, in case you didn't know, there is a draft version of the IRS Form W-9, and the draft version came out on September 17th, 2025, and it had a revision date, or it has a revision date of January 2026. Now, as of the publication of this podcast, it is, or the day before, it is not the draft version of the W-9 has not been published yet. And the way that you can check is, just go to the IRS website or bookmark the IRS website, the W-9, the PDF version of the W-9. So you can go to irs.gov, type in W-9, and when you do that, you'll come up, you'll see the Form W-9 PDF version, and just bookmark that. And every day when you come in, like I do, you can just check that bookmark and make sure that when you click on that W-9 and you look at the revision date, it still says March 2024. All right. And that was something, by the way, I used to just check the published dates, which was another site on the website or IRS's website, another page. But it's much easier to do this because you go straight to the form and you can look at the revision date. You can go to the published forms on the IRS site. It's like I said, another page, but then you have to search for the W-9 and, wait for it to come up. And then you see March 2024 and like, okay, but you've gone a couple of extra steps. But anyway, I digress. So if you didn't know, there is a draft version out there. The latest version posted date is 9/17. Now, if they do like they did the last one, they may have other iterations of the versions that'll have advancing posted dates. But for right now, the last one is 9/17, September 17th. All right, so that's out there. Now, what is the change that might affect the vendor setup and maintenance process? Because there are some, I think just one other one related to the 1099 DA about assets. But the one that affects the vendor setup and maintenance process is it's a verbiage change that kind of changes everything. And so, not everything, but what I would like to just impress here, because when I look at that verbiage change, and if you go on the W-9 itself and then just scroll down on the instructions, you'll see that, they've always had instructions to the vendors, whether they read them or not. But the instructions around what name and number to give the requester. So when they look at number 6, which is sole proprietorship or disregarded entity owned by an individual, they say for that type of an account that you should give the name and social security number of the owner. However, it has a footnote. And in the footnote of the current version, March 2024, it says you must show your individual name on line 1 and enter your business or DBA name, if any, on line 2. Then it says you may use either your social security number or EIN if you have one, but the IRS encourages you to use your social security number. Now, the change in the current version of the draft W-9, which is again September 17th, that verbiage has changed to you must show your individual name on line 1 and enter your business or DBA name, if any, on line 2. Your social security number or SSN must be furnished. Do not enter an EIN. And that's the change. If you have someone that is a sole proprietor or disregarded entity owned by an individual, so they're checking that first tax class. And by the way, if you have a vendor that is a single member LLC, they should be checking that first tax class if it's owned by an individual sole proprietor, or they are a sole proprietor, or they're owned by an individual. I get confused about that one, but they still do select that first tax class, because if you remember, before this latest version that is published, which is March 2024, that line used to say individual sole proprietor single member LLC. Now it just says individual sole proprietor. But in any event, if that single member LLC has not filed papers to be taxed as a C corporation or S corporation, then they need to also select that tax class, which means that when this latest draft version is published, that you need to collect the social security number from anyone that selects that first tax class. And again, Jason Dennison and I talked about that on this past podcast episode. 369. So if you haven't listened to that, go ahead and listen to that, because he brought up some stuff too that I hadn't thought about. Because, typically when a new version of the W-9 comes out, it is effective immediately. You start using it immediately, but you don't actually have to go back and collect any, forms, or get those new forms filled out by your existing vendors, right? You usually don't have to do that. But in that discussion, that kind of opened my eyes to that, as well as the fact that I've been getting questions and scenarios by my clients, by other folks that are uh, listen to my podcast, subscribers, right? And so it's actually bringing up quite a few different scenarios or questions that I had not originally thought of. And so I say at least five, because I know that there are going to be more, right, in the coming, days, weeks, or whatever, until that form. And I won't say until the form is published. It'll probably be, through when the form is published, after the form is published, as folks start to grapple with what it means to collect and comply with the that newly published IRS draft form of the W-9. And so, and that's if, right, IRS doesn't change it. I mean, they could, I doubt it, but they could. And they may never publish it. I doubt that too. I think they're going to publish it at some point, since that is some critical information that they are requesting now. And so I would, again, take a look at these or listen to these questions that I think you need to ask, and then see if there are any additional questions. And you can feel free to email me. My email address is in the show notes if you have even more, because I would love to hear about it and compile them. And just so you know, I don't have any answers to all these questions yet. I am compiling them, and I will probably either make them a podcast episode for each one. Or maybe even do like a free webinar or something, so we can all, kind of jump on a call and listen to the whole thing, or watch the whole thing at the same time, or listen to all the questions, all the possible resolutions, and then be able to get your questions at that time. So make sure you stay tuned, because I don't know which way I'm going to go with this, and maybe invite Jason back, right, to do it, because he is. I did have his bio in the last podcast, but he is a 1099 accountant, and so would love to get his input when that form is finally published. So anyway, I've gone 12 minutes and haven't said anything about the five questions. So let's go ahead and start with the five questions. So the first question is, do you need to collect new forms from, individual sole proprietors that should have given you an SSN? And I'll say sole proprietors that should have given you a social security number. According to, right, the new version of the W-9 that will require social security numbers from sole proprietors. So you have existing vendors. Those existing vendors may have given you a social security number, or they may have given you the EIN. The IRS said they could have given either, but they prefer the social security number, not that the vendor read those instructions. But the question now is do you go back and collect the new forms from your existing sole proprietors that now, if you collected that form, you would require it? And Jason brought this up, and I thought initially no, because you get a new W-9 in, you start, go forward from that day with what the requirements are. But he brought up the fact that, one, the requirements did change, because normally the onus is on the vendor to submit a new W-9 when they know their information has changed. or if we know that their information has changed. And I kind of thought, no, but then I thought about it. Their information hasn't necessarily changed, but the information that we need to collect has changed. In addition to that, when you start your tax reporting next year for tax year 2026, is the IRS going to require a Social Security number when you report, right, your tax filing to the IRS for those sole proprietors? Now, it would be great if the IRS will give us some direction on that. Jason and I were laughing about that in the podcast. Maybe they will, but maybe they won't. I do recommend that you check with your tax professional, your leadership to verify whether or not you need to go back and collect them. I'm going to say that they will probably say yes. It won't hurt to do it, but it might hurt if you don't, and it's then determined to be required if you ever get like an audit from the IRS. Or if you do your tax filing for the next year and then you get notification, right, that you should have collected the SSN. I don't know if that will come on as CP 2100, which is what you normally get if you don't have the correct tax ID. If you provided one and it didn't match, I don't know if they'll treat that the same way if you have a Social Security number or EIN instead of a Social Security number, because you collected that W-9 from the vendor prior to the new version of the form. So that's the first and the biggest question. You need to discuss that with your leadership, with your tax professional, but hopefully the IRS will provide some clear guidance on that. All right, now the second one is if the answer to the first question is yes, and when that form is published, you need to collect a new W-9 from your existing sole proprietors that gave you an EIN, because now you have to collect the Social Security number. The question is, if that's true, should you start requiring the Social Security number from new vendors that are sole proprietors now? Because let's say, now we're going to assume that because the revision date of the draft W-9 is January 2026. Let's say it does come out in January of 2026. And you have new vendors that you are onboarding today, tomorrow, all up through whenever they publish it, right, in this month. So that means if they give you an EIN, you're going to have to turn around, right? After you set the vendor up, you're going to have to turn around and request a new W-9 from that same vendor that you just set up. So what about, just putting that into place now? Now, I'll tell you, I had this discussion with one subscriber, and the issue was, well, they didn't want to do that because they said that the IRS does not require it now. And I brought up I brought up something that I bring up a lot, and that is the fact that while you can't require less than what the IRS requires, you can require more. So even though the IRS today does not require the Social Security number, it gives the vendors a choice. That doesn't mean that you can't require the Social Security number. Now, I do recognize that depending on, your size, the leverage, your industry, and where I was going with leverage, right? Your leverage over the vendors. I mean, I used to be with a top 15 company, a Fortune 15 company. And so whatever we said, the vendors wanted to do business with us. And so they did. I recognize not everyone has that type of leverage. However, it might save you some time from having to recollect the W-9 from vendors that do not give you one in this time period, this interim time period when you're most likely going to have to collect it in the future. All right, so that's the second question. The third question is, If you are still collecting vendor supporting documents via email, and I know a lot of folks listening to this podcast that are my subscribers, because I always talk about manual processes. And so I know a lot of you still collect the vendor supporting documentation via email. The question now is, well, how do you collect what is the ultimate of sensitive personal information, the social security number, securely? Right. And so when I used to talk about, and I do have a W-9 training session, and when I talk about collecting the social security number versus the EIN, I always say, if the IRS would ask Debra would have preferred that they collect the EIN over the social security number. And that is because that information, right, goes into your vendor master file. But if you think about it, when is the last time you did a security audit to see who actually has access to that sensitive data in your vendor master file? And so, collecting it via email runs you the same risk, especially since everything that we are doing, the fraudsters already know about. So if you go out with a campaign and for all your, for all your sole proprietors that gave you an EIN, and now you got to get an SSN, and you got fraudsters lurking in the emails, they may take that opportunity, right, to say, hey, not only am I going to give you my social security number, but I also have, right, a bank change or a remittance address change, and uh, something to that effect. Or let's just say you're collecting, and maybe this could be a number 6, but I'm gonna, lump it with this one because maybe you have your internal team members collecting that information, and it's not collected securely because it's giving them access now to the vendor's social security number just because they're collecting it and passing it over to you. So that probably needs to be its own thing. And but I always recommend that if you have internal team members that are in the middle between you and the vendor, collecting that information from the vendor, giving it to you, you might have a big risk here. You already had it because some of your vendors are already giving you social security numbers. And I will tell you that some of these internal team members are not, handling those documents securely. They're not saving them securely. And they do save them, by the way, because especially if you had to go back and forth to get the right documents, because they don't want to have to go through that again. So if you ask for a W-9 again, they have saved it from before and they want to give it to you. Well, where they're saving it at? They don't have the same level um, of care and control that we would have because we know what the issues are. And we are trying to avoid fraud. They're just trying to avoid having to go back and forth for something that they didn't even understand why you had to collect it in the first place. And so if you are still collecting vendor supporting documents via risky email, and if that then is transferred to your internal team member collecting it via risky email, um, you need to find a way to get that done more securely. And so my first recommendation is get the internal team member out of the middle of it. And then the second one is to find a secure way to collect it that's outside of risky email. And so that is something that you need to think about. And I do have some ideas of what you can do with that. And I've set them before. If you have a vendor portal for anything, e-invoicing portal, if there's a way for the vendor to upload an invoice, then there's a way that they can use that same method to upload a a W-9, or maybe there's a messaging whenever within that system where they can attach documents if they can't upload them, because maybe the upload will take them through some invoice flow or something. So you can use something like that or secure mail, but that is something that you need to start thinking about how you are going to collect what is definitely now going to be sensitive information for that first tax class. How are you going to collect it securely? Wow, that was a long one. That was number three. All right, so number four is okay. So you're going to go out and collect from your eligible vendor, sole proprietors that gave you an EIN. You're not going to go and collect their social security number, but meanwhile, you have a uh, uh, vendor already set up, right, using their EIN number. And when that W-9 from the vendor comes back, is it going to be recognized that it is not really a duplicate, and that it won't just be set up because it is a generic request coming in from a vendor to be set up, right? How are you going to track those requests for a W-9 with a social security number on it from existing vendors so that it doesn't get treated like a new request and get set up newly in your vendor master file? So now you'll have the vendor set up with the EIN that they gave you in the first place when they originally set up. And then if it's not recognized when it comes back in and gets set up as a new vendor, now you could potentially have a vendor set up, two vendors set up for that one vendor, one under their social security number and one under their EIN. So you have to find a way to avoid doing that. My recommendation, at least initially here, again, I will be thinking about some other ways and tips that you can do or that you can implement so that you don't run into these issues. But is to, identify, run a report from your system or systems and identify those eligible vendors that you need to collect a social security number from. Keep that running tab in whatever system you want to put it in, Excel, Google Sheets, I don't know, a database or something. And when those requests come in, make sure you check them off, or whoever is creating new vendors, setting up new vendors, changing existing vendors, right? Make sure that they know that that project is being done and that they check all their new requests, all the requests that they receive against that spreadsheet so that they know what they're dealing with. And then that begs the question of, do you create a new vendor record for the new tax ID? So you have a vendor that's been set up. They were set up with their social security number. They're running through, I don't know, maybe uh, files. What do you call those things? Automated files. I forget off the top of my head, but EDI, that's what I'm trying to think of, EDI files. So they're included in EDI files where they send electronic invoices. They have a vendor ID. Maybe you've got some batch filing going on to another automation in your AP or vendor space. And so now, if you determine that you need to create a new vendor record because, technically it's a new tax ID. And I always say that payments need to follow the tax ID, right? And you need to create a new vendor record for every new tax ID. Now, all of those, systems that are running using just fine, by the way, using the vendor ID for the vendor record that has the EIN on it. Now you got to go back and change all of that. Now you have to open and close POs on the old vendor record and open them up on the new one. Now you have to move invoices from the old vendor record to the new vendor record. So it causes a lot of havoc. And if it were a true, right, the vendor changed their name, changed their tax ID, maybe they were maybe they merged, maybe they were acquired. That actually is required and valid to do, although nobody wants to do it. But is that really necessary? in this scenario, because it's not like you're going to go forward on that EIN, but it is the same vendor, but maybe you reported last year under that EIN. If you just type over that number, where's your history? I don't know the answer to the question. That maybe I am overthinking it. Feel free to email me with, Debra, you're crazy. It should be fine doing it this way. Just let me know what that is, because I might just be overthinking it. Again, I'm getting these questions that are coming in, and I'm not the only one that's overthinking it, but I definitely could be overthinking it. All right, so those are the five, and I'll repeat them here. Do you need to collect new forms from sole proprietors that previously gave you an EIN? And then that's the first one. The second one is, if the answer to that question is yes, should you just start requiring the Social Security number from new vendors that are sole proprietors now? And then the third question is, if you are still collecting vendor supporting documents via risky email, and I'll add via internal team members in the middle of that, collecting it on your behalf, how do you now collect, right, the documents that will definitely have a Social Security number on it, sensitive personal information, securely? And then the fourth question is, how do you handle avoiding potential duplicates in your vendor master file as you collect these new W-9s from existing vendors with different tax IDs? How do you prevent potential duplicates in your vendor master file? And then the last one is, when you get that new Social Security number in, do you create a new vendor record, because it technically is a new or different tax ID? And I am sure, again, that there is something that I left out. So, as you can tell, I get a little bit emotional about the IRS W-9s and what they require. I overthink it, probably. Yes. But again, if you have anything that you can contribute, anything that I didn't mention, be sure to email me. My email address is in the show notes. And stay tuned, because I do want to have, or will provide some content in the future, especially when the W-9 is published, with some tips, some process changes, some recommendations for how you should handle the rollout or the publication of the new version of the W-9 whenever that comes out. All right. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 370th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.